You are listening to Meet the Thriller Author, the podcast where I interview writers of mysteries, thrillers, and suspense books. I am your host, Alan Peterson, and this is episode number 116. In this episode of the podcast, you'll be meeting Brian Freeman, who is a New York Times bestselling author of psychological thrillers, including the Jonathan Stride and Frost Easton series. His books have been sold in 46 countries and 22 languages. He's widely acclaimed for his You Are There settings and his complex, engaging characters and twist-filled plots. Brian's novel, Spilled Blood, won the award for Best Hardcover Novel in the annual Thriller Awards given out by the International Thriller Writers Organization. Brian was selected as the author to continue the Robert Ludlum Jason Bourne series with a new Bourne novel. The Bourne Revolution was published in July, and Brian's 10th novel in the Jonathan Stride series, Funeral for a Friend, was published a few weeks ago on September 22nd. I'm amazed at Brian Freeman's versatility in writing bone-chilling psychological thrillers like Thief River Falls and action-packed Bourne thriller like Bourne Evolution. So excited to chat to him about that and a whole lot more. So stay tuned for my interview with Brian Freeman. A quick housekeeping. We're still under the evacuation order from the glass fire place where we're staying at up in Napa Valley. So because of that, I still don't have access to my computers, my podcast gear. The house is still standing thanks to the hard work of the firefighters. Not using my regular equipment yet, so if you notice the quality of the audio still isn't the best in this intro, that is the reason for that. I also wanted to let you know that I have started a Patreon, and you can support the podcast by visiting thrillingreads.com/member. I've put together some pretty cool membership perks for patrons, especially if you're a writer. So go check it out at thrillingreads.com/member. Thank you for your support, and here we go. Here's my interview with Brian Freeman. Hi, everyone. This is Alan with Meet the Thriller Author, and on the podcast today, I have Brian Freeman, who is a New York Times bestselling author. His thrillers include the Jonathan Stride and the Frost Easton series. Brian was selected as the official author to continue the Robert Ludlum's Jason Bourne series, and his new Bourne novel, The Bourne Revolution, was published in July. So I was really glad to have the opportunity to chat with Brian. How are you doing this afternoon?
I'm doing great. Great to talk to you.
Yeah, nice talking to you. Thank you for being on the podcast. And so for listeners who might not be familiar with you, can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah. This is kind of a big year for me because it's actually my 15th anniversary in the book biz. It was fall of 2005 that my very first book, Immoral, came out, which was my first book and also kicked off my Jonathan Stride series. And here we are 15 years later. I think I've got like 22 books out in the marketplace now. It's just been an amazing ride all this time. And I love the fact that I've been able to do a lot of different projects. I mean, I've got a couple different series out there. I've got a bunch of different standalone novels. And now, taking over the Bourne series, that was just so much fun. So I love the fact that I've been able to do so many different projects in the last few years. That's what really keeps it energizing.
Yeah, I was very impressed with that because, as you mentioned, we were talking a little bit offline. I first found about your work with one of your standalones, I believe. Thief River Falls is a standalone.
Yes.
Loved it. It was an awesome thriller. And then I found out that I'm like, oh, he's also writing the Jason Bourne, like two very different type of thrillers. How does that work?
Yeah, exactly. That's what's kind of fun is being able to do projects that are so really different from each other. I mean, Thief River Falls is a very intense psychological thriller. It's really inside the head of the main character. And in fact, we've had such an amazing run with Thief River Falls. Literally just this past weekend, Amazon put out an article and listed their top 10 most sold thrillers of 2020. And you've got books by Grisham and King and Kuntz and Baldacci and Coben, and there's Thief River Falls in there as well. So that was just a fantastic experience. But then you contrast, this very intense psychological book with the Bourne Evolution, and the Bourne book is so adrenaline driven. I mean, really a pure action thriller. And but that was kind of what made the books fun to write. Is each time I was kind of taking off one hat, putting on another hat. It's such a different kind of book. It just enwraps me as a writer in a whole different way.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. It's like it was. I was expecting it. I don't know what I was expecting because the original Bourne was came out so like what 30 years ago, probably now.
40 years ago, yeah,
40. Oh
90.
wow,
Yeah.
time flies.
I read it when I was 17. I mean, that's just amazing.
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of cool how you. It's kind of like a. Is it fair to say it's kind of like a reboot because it's kind of like set, now.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. I mean, the thing is, there have been so many different iterations of Jason Bourne over the years. I mean, you had 3 books by Robert Ludlum featuring Bourne. You had Eric von Luesbader taking over the series in the early 2000s and doing, I think it was 11 Jason Bourne novels, and then you've got all of those, hugely popular Matt Damon movies. And actually, I may be one of the few Bourne fans that remembers when it wasn't Matt Damon who was Jason Bourne. It was actually Richard Chamberlain who was Jason Bourne in an ABC miniseries back in 1988. Had Richard Chamberlain and Jacqueline Smith were in there. So so Bourne has had kind of so many different shapes and ideas in people's heads that I was thinking as I thought about this, how do I kind of create a version of Bourne that's going to be true to Ludlum's vision and will satisfy these audiences that have so many different ideas about Bourne. And so I really thought that I just needed to kind of completely reboot the series so it functions as a standalone. You don't need to have read any of the other books. You don't need to have seen any of the movies. It completely stands on its own. But what I really was focusing on was trying to bring back the elements in Ludlum's original novel, in The Bourne Identity, that have made Bourne such an iconic character in thriller literature for so many years. And so I think when you read The Bourne Evolution, I hope that even though it's an all new story and it feels very modern and it's set in the modern era, it hopefully should feel very much like Ludlum's original Jason Bourne. And for sort of Bourne fans and aficionados, I've thrown in a bunch of little tributes to the original novel throughout the book as well.
Oh yeah, little Easter eggs in there.
Yes, yeah. Exactly right.
Yeah. And so what was the feeling when you first got involved in the project? Were you nervous to take it on such an iconic character?
Yeah, it was probably a little over coming up on 2 years ago that I heard from my agent that Putnam was taking over the Bourne books, and they were looking for a new author to take over the series. And she was asking, did I want to throw my hat in the ring? And I said, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a great opportunity in the thriller world. I've been a Robert Ludlum, Jason Bourne fan, pretty much my whole life, going back to when I was a teenager. And so we tossed my head into the ring, and it was kind of a black box from there. I don't exactly know what process they went through, but it was sort of months of silence after that. And I thought, well, they've probably decided to go another way. And then I got a call from my agent in I think February of last year, and said 5 words that will linger in my memory. Putnam wants you for Bourne, and so my first reaction was oh my God, this is just incredible. I mean, what an amazing opportunity. And my second reaction was, oh my God, how do I kind of stay true to this incredible vision and step into the shoes of someone like Ludlum, who, I mean, has always been one of my heroes as a writer. And it's intimidating at first, and you sort of think, you sort of start second guessing yourself. But the first thing I did when I was starting to work on the book, literally the first 2 words I wrote on my whiteboard were "have fun." And because ultimately it's such an amazing opportunity. It's such a high point in my whole career. I wanted to make sure that I just really enjoyed the process of pulling this together. And once I kind of focused on just really what kind of a great opportunity this was, I think from that point on I was just able to focus on the character and the story and have fun bringing it to life. And people have asked, is it hard to get inside the head of somebody else's series character? I mean, I'm obviously used to working with my own series characters, and and in some ways it felt completely natural. I mean, realistically, I've had Jason Bourne in my life even longer than I've had any of my own characters. I mean, I knew first met Jason Bourne when I was 17. I wasn't going to meet Jonathan Stride for another 23 years. So yeah, it actually it felt really kind of natural to sort of to kind of step inside the world of Jason Bourne.
Yeah, it's kind of cool. It's kind of like that James Bond who just keeps going. And
yeah, exactly. Well, and if you can do a reboot that really sort of brings it into the modern era, it just, I hope, feels fresh and new and up to date. It doesn't. I don't want it to have any kind of dated feel. This should feel like a 2020 thriller. So.
Yeah, and it absolutely was. Recommend the listeners to go check it out. And yeah, it kind of reminded me of the whole like Daniel Craig, how he kind of reinfused that franchise.
Right,
cool.
right.
And so what's the main differences for you between writing like your regular, not regular, but like your psychological thriller, for example, versus these political spy type thrillers? Is it the same approach for you? Is it a whole different hat?
Well, the process I think is pretty similar, but I think the challenges are a little different. I mean, writing a psychological thriller, it's a very emotional kind of experience. I mean, I'm really trying to get inside the heads of the characters, and I'm kind of suffering along with them as they go through all of the turmoil of the novel. And in a lot of cases, I know that some dark things are going to be happening to these people, and that's tough as a writer to be kind of dealing with all of the real emotional aspects of the thriller. With the Bourne book, I think it was a little different because, as I say, it's more action driven, it's more adrenaline driven, and obviously I'm getting inside, Bourne's head and trying to explain him as a character to the reader. But I think it's less of a psychological novel and more of a pure thriller. So for me, the challenge really is kind of making that making the whole flow of the prose work for the reader. I mean, because it is actually very, it's very difficult to write action scenes in prose in such a way that the reader can really kind of see them all, it all happening in their head. I mean, you're used to watching action scenes in the movies where you've got the visuals to kind of go along with it. But when you're painting that picture in the prose, I think that is probably the biggest challenge of the action thriller is gripping the reader in those scenes with just the words on the page and still being able to have it come alive and feel that same sense of adrenaline that you feel when you're watching a movie.
You've had such a busy year too, because you had the Bourne book came out in July, and you have another book coming out in September 22nd. That's for the Jonathan Stride series, right?
Yeah. Funeral for a Friend comes out next Tuesday on the 22nd, and that'll be my third this year. And technically it would be four because my Audible bestseller, The Deep, Deep Snow, which was available in audiobook last year, finally comes out in a print edition in October. So the paperback will be available of The Deep, Deep Snow on October 27th. So yeah, it's been a wild year. That's for sure. And I've been writing 3 books this year as well. I finished my new standalone thriller Infinite, which comes out next March, and I'm currently working on 2 books simultaneously. I'm working on a follow-up Audible book to The Deep, Deep Snow, and then I'm working on the next Jason Bourne novel as well.
Oh yeah, I was going to ask you about that. So do you write them both? Do you work on both at the same time, or do you wait for one, finish one, and start the next one? Or
yeah, well, this is the second year in a row that I've actually had to work on 2 books simultaneously because the due dates are within a couple of weeks of each other, and you have to sort of do a little on each one because otherwise I think I'd feel behind the 8 ball. I'd get one done and suddenly realize I have like 8 days left to write the other book. So last year, what I did, I literally was writing the Bourne Evolution and the Stride book, Funeral for a Friend, simultaneously. I would do a week on one and then a week on the other. And I was nervous about how that was going to go because I'd never tried anything like that before. But it worked out pretty smoothly. And but this year I decided to change it around a little bit. I've been spending sort of more time on each one before I shift off. So instead of focusing on, I'll spend a week on this book, it's more content driven. I'll be like, I'm going to do 20,000 words on the Bourne book, and then I'll shift over to the Audible book, and I'll do the same kind of thing there. And so that's been kind of the back and forth since May.
Oh, so that's interesting. So when you say the audible book, so the audiobook is released before the print or digital or the ebook?
Yeah,
Oh.
the Deep Deep Snow was an Audible original, so they had an audio exclusive last year, and it was, the Deep Deep Snow was a huge hit. It hit the New York Times bestseller list for audio, and
Yeah.
I've gotten just amazing feedback on that book. But it's that too is a different writing experience, because when you're writing, when you know that the primary way people are going to be embracing the book is by listening to it, it means you're thinking about the prose and the structure of the book in a different way, and you're literally sort of writing and editing the book out loud.
Okay, yeah, this is why I was a little confused when I was doing research for this interview. I said the date was from earlier, but there was a pre-order on the book. I'm like, oh, maybe Amazon messed up the the date or something. But yeah, okay, I see now.
Yeah. So it's kind of come out in installments. The audio was last year, the ebook I think was January, and now we're finally getting a print edition out there. So,
and what is your writing process? Has it changed? I mean, you've been doing this 15 years. What has
15 years now? Yeah.
15 years. Wow, and over 20 novels. Has it changed? Your process changed?
It has actually. It's evolved a lot over the years. In the early days, I tended to do very, very exhaustive outlines on each book, and I would do very, very detailed background sketches on the characters, and kind of map out every chapter before I started everything out. And I think because I was sort of early in my career, I was using that as kind of my crutch to sort of make sure I could get through the process while I was really getting comfortable with the idea of being a full-time writer. And the more that I've been in the business and the more books I've written, the less I feel the need to do that. So I still outline, but it's much more loose than it ever was before. I kind of just sort of jot down notes on each chapter, really sort of why that chapter's in the book. And the outline becomes more of a roadmap, sort of with key benchmarks from the beginning to the end. And the fact is, once I start actually getting the words on paper, the outline changes a lot. So by the time I'm, chapter 3 or 4, I'm starting to go back and rework the outline. And I don't do as much work on the characters before I start. I actually do more of letting the character come to life on the page and let them kind of guide me about who they are, as opposed to me kind of trying to impose my vision of who that character is. And I think that makes the whole process a little fresher and more spontaneous. It also makes it, I guess, a little bit more neurotic, because it means, every morning I wake up and I really don't know what I'm going to do that day, other than kind of some rough guidelines of what I might want to be doing in a chapter. So you're always kind of waking up every morning, oh God, I got to do this all over again. And but as I say, I think because it's more spontaneous, because it's more organic, I think it keeps it fresh for the reader.
And did you always want to be a writer since a kid, or did that come later?
No, I was one of those. I was one of those kids. That's always what I wanted to do. I can remember sitting in sixth grade class in California, working on my very first mystery novel, and I had a great eighth grade composition teacher, and she really recognized how much I loved writing, and she did something I think these days with all the standardized tests and curricula that a teacher would probably never be able to do. She told me, when you come to my class, don't worry so much about the lesson plans. Just sit there and write your stories. Oh, wow. And so that was what I did in her class. And the summer after that, I started in on my first full-length novel and spent 18 months writing that. And after that, gosh, I had the bug. That was what I wanted to do with my life. And it only took another 25 years or so before I broke through. But this has been my dream as far back as I can remember.
And were you always a fan of mysteries and thrillers? Sounds like you say you're rating your first attempt as a mystery.
Yeah. I think I blame it on my grandmother. She was the big mystery lover in the family, and she would always tell me, "Oh, I'm reading this great new book. It's got lots of bodies in it." So, I think I was always going to be in that genre. But I grew up reading a lot of the big dramatic authors. I loved folks like Leon Uris and James Michener and Irving Wallace, people that wrote these very long dramatic kinds of books. And I think that's one of the reasons why I've never sort of written a lot of kind of straight up traditional thrillers. They're more dramatic intimate kinds of dramas. I think that kind of goes back to the sorts of books that I was reading when I was a kid.
Yeah, I remember those. My dad was big onto those. That was one of the first books I remember picking up was Exodus, and then James
Yeah,
Michener's
yeah,
Centennial.
yep, yeah. Oh, Centennial, what a great book!
Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah.
I remember the first time I read it though, and I was a teenager. I remember reading it. I'm like, I thought this was like a western, and it was like it starts with like the dinosaurs, and
Yes.
then he just kind of hooks you in.
Exactly. Yep. Yep. That's right.
So when you start writing a book, and I guess it's kind of hard with you because you're doing so many different projects. But what's the process that it takes from the time you get the idea to the book is finished?
Yeah, there's usually kind of three key phases. I mean, the first phase is building out the story itself. So it's thinking through the plot and the characters and the setting and kind of letting the whole backstory come to life. You know, there's two layers of the story. I mean, there's the backstory, which is really sort of who does what to whom and why, and then there's how do you take those events and unfold them to the reader in the most suspenseful, dramatic way possible. So the first phase is really kind of figuring out what shape is this story going to have. And then the second phase is actually getting the words on the page. And obviously that's the longest part of the process in terms of, literally day by day, writing the first draft. And then I get through the end, and it's kind of my favorite part is the editing of the book, because I'm sort of a fanatical editor. I just love to keep tweaking and tweaking. If you handed me one of my printed novels today, I'd take my pen and I'd start editing it. So you never really end. You just sort of stop. But so it's those three phases, and so how I approach it, and what the day looks like varies depending on where I am in the book. When I'm actually getting words on paper, I find that I do most of my writing in the afternoons. In the mornings, I'm kind of thinking through what I'm going to do and blocking out a given chapter. And then, in the afternoons, I tend to be getting most of the actual words on the page.
And can you tell us about the Funeral for a Friend, the one that's coming up next week?
Yeah. Funeral for a Friend is the newest Jonathan Stride novel based in Duluth. And Stride is such a good friend to me at this point, because I go back with him years and years and years, and my first 5 books were all Jonathan Stride novels, and I love his intensity as a hero. I mean, I literally named him Stride for a reason, to kind of capture that step-by-step determination he's got as a character. And so even when it's been a couple of years since my last Stride novel, so even when he's not what I'm working on, I always kind of feel him next to me, sort of poking me in the side and asking when he's going to get back on stage. And the thing about a series, or my approach to a series, is I'm doing it through the lives of the characters. And so when I'm thinking about another Stride novel, I'm always thinking through what's going on in these characters' lives and where is the sort of next key transition point. So in any given book, I may focus on sort of a different aspect of the series characters and sort of make the mystery come to life around that. So Funeral for a Friend is a very, very intense, emotional Stride novel. It goes back to some long ago things in Stride's past that start coming to life, and some old relationships that need to be dealt with. And I always love the idea that in my Stride books, there's a lot of different threads that seem completely unconnected. And I think my readers know at this point that somewhere along the line, all those threads are going to come together. And the fun part is not knowing how and why. And that's definitely true for Funeral for a Friend. So I love this book. People will always ask, this is kind of a long running series. People will say, well, gosh, do I have to go all the way back to the beginning before I start? And I really focus on trying to write the books so you can dive in anywhere and get a full, fresh look at the characters, even if this is the first time that you're meeting them. And for series readers, I'm always taking a look at new aspects of the characters, so they don't feel like, well, I've been down that road all this time before. They're finding out something new about the character with each book as well. So I always tell people, if you want to go back to the beginning, well, heck, I certainly love readers that do that, but you don't have to. I've had readers pick up Stride with each new book. So.
Yeah, definitely have to check that out. And we mentioned it a little bit offline. Our paths You went from California to Minnesota. I went from Minnesota to California. But I really love those the Minnesota thrillers. They're such good. And I've discovered yours, and there's John Sanford and William Kent Kruger. It's kind of interesting that Minnesota is turning into a great state for thrillers.
It is, yeah. There's a real cadre of mystery writers in Minnesota, and for me, I just think this area really lends itself to the drama of the thriller. Partly because I just think that I love writing weather. I love writing natural surroundings, and weather is such a part of the day-to-day life of Minnesotans throughout the year that it just sort of inevitably works its way into the plots as well. So when you're dealing with these 20 below zero days and those howling winds and blizzards, it just sort of speaks to Hitchcockian drama that way.
Yeah, you did that. You did such a wonderful job on Thief River Falls on that one with the weather. I mean, you could just feel the cold and to the bones when I was reading that book. So
it's a good book to read in a heat wave, so you can get that little chill.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Before I let you go, for the listeners who are aspiring writers, I always like to ask about any advice that you could have for them.
Yeah, well, there's a couple things. One is really basic advice, but I always tell aspiring writers that they have to remember that 100% of unwritten books have never been published. Somewhere along the line, you're going to have to, get a combination of super glue and your backside and a chair and a keyboard. And you just got to sit there and get the words on the page. Because I think that, all of us as writers tend to be our own worst enemies. I mean, it is so easy to psych yourself out as a writer and lose confidence and lose faith in what you're doing. And all I can tell you is, it doesn't matter whether you're working on your first novel or whether you're working on your 23rd novel, you never really get past that. And what you have to do is use that tension and that anxiety and kind of, funnel it into your inspiration on the page. So, don't be afraid of the fear and the anxiety. Just let it all come out on the page, and don't let yourself psych yourself out. Keep writing. I've talked to so many aspiring writers that they'll get 50 pages into a project and they'll be like, this is crap. And they'll just stop. And my advice is, keep going, get that book finished. Once you finish the book, there's going to be this sense of, tremendous accomplishment that you've actually got those words on the page. And you're probably going to look back and realize, those 50 pages were a lot better than I thought.
Yeah, it's like was it Stephen King? His wife fished the manuscript for Carrie out of the garbage, so you never know.
Yeah, exactly right.
And best place for listeners to find you would be your website. It's bfreemanbooks.com, right?
Yeah, you can find me on the web at bfreemanbooks.com. It's all one word, bfreemanbooks.com. People can also hook up with me on social media. I'm on Twitter at bfreemanbooks, Instagram at bfreemanbooks, and Facebook. I'm over at facebook.com/bfreemanfans. I just have to throw a little twist in there. But send me emails, hook up with me on social media. I love hearing from readers, and you can get a lot of information about the books, and I always look forward to hearing what people think.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Brian, for being on the podcast. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Meet the Thriller Author podcast. Be sure to visit thrillerauthors.com to join the conversation, access the show notes, and discover great thrilling reads. If you enjoy the podcast, I'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and give a review to it, wherever it is that you're listening to this podcast, be it iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, wherever it is that you're listening to this right now. I would appreciate it. And please do check out my own thriller novels over at my website at alanpeterson.com. Until next time.